Pew Research released the results of a new survey about a potential two-state solution in Israel-Palestine. And the numbers are perhaps unsurprising in a variety of ways. So among the findings, a majority of Palestinians aren't optimistic that there will be a two-state deal, and 84% of them doubt the sincerity of this current Israeli government in wanting a deal. I wonder why that is. I'm surprised that number's not like 98%, because it should be, because Netanyahu has proven he's not interested in a deal. But here's the most important finding that I wanted to discuss with you guys. A plurality of Palestinians support armed struggle in order to get a Palestinian state. So 38% said armed struggle, 22% said negotiations, and 20% said nonviolent resistance. Now, then you also had 16% that said a combination of these, and 4% that said, I don't know. So I read those numbers, and I was a little disheartened because, now don't get me wrong, do I get it? Do I understand? Okay, you're a Palestinian, your land was just jacked. You're fucking pissed. So when you do violence, you say, this isn't even, you can't just call it violence, that's totally misleading, it's resistance. Somebody comes into your house and takes it, well, for you to take out a gun and say, well, get the fuck out, are you the one that's really being violent? Or was the violent action the person taking your fucking house and then you doing self-defense and doing resistance and saying, I'm gonna need you to get off my fucking property? So, like, don't get me wrong, I get it. I understand the position of the Palestinians and I understand what they've gone through. But I think that when you say we're going to do armed struggle, you've set up a strategy where you're almost certainly going to lose. Because, I don't know if you noticed, Israel has the backing of the world's most powerful military that's ever been created in human history. And they so massively outgun you and have so much more power that you basically decided, I'm the equivalent of like a toddler who's picking a fight with Mike Tyson in his prime. You're not going to win. There's no way you're going to win. So you would think that, well, okay, then the idea is negotiations. Well, look, on that one, I wouldn't even try that anymore. Why? Because Netanyahu's not interested. He's just not interested in doing a peace deal. So even the 22% of people that say negotiations is the way to go, I would say, no, actually, you're wrong too. Negotiations is not going to work because the other guy doesn't want a deal. He wants all the land, and he's been slowly taking it. So then that leaves us with one option, nonviolent resistance. Now, the counter-argument to that is people will say, no, but you don't get it. When we do nonviolent resistance, it doesn't get fucking covered. So if the media doesn't cover you peacefully protesting, well, then they're just going to continue mission creep, continue to take more and more land and build more and more settlements, and we're disappearing here, and we're only out there with fucking posters. That's not going to get anything accomplished. That's the counter-argument. But there's something that overrides that argument, and there's something that defeats that argument, which is, if you do nonviolent resistance, in the long run, you will win. Why? Number one, history, which has proven that. Number two, you already are winning when you do that strategy. So, nonviolent resistance. What falls in that category? BDS. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I know that's going to work because it's already working. So, in apartheid South Africa, where it was a very similar problem, what happened? Well, that's what they did. Effectively BDS. And then eventually the rich, the ruling class, if you will, in South Africa, turned to the government and said, we got to fix this problem because now we're going broke skis. And if there's one thing that rich people don't like is when they start looting their money. So if you apply the same kind of pressure to Israel, you're going to have the same kind of results. You're going to force them to the table to make a deal because if you don't, the entire ruling elite in Israel, they're going to lose more and more and more money, and they're not going to like that. So it would become more of a benefit to them to do a two-state deal and to do a peace deal. Now, finally, what's my evidence that BDS is working? Well, we covered the report on the show recently. It wasn't that long ago. Haaretz had a long article about this where buried in the article was this incredible fact. Quote, 20 to 30% of West Bank companies left the West Bank because of BDS. 20 to 30%. Guys, this is also at a time when there's this massive counter fight against BDS, where people are tarring it as anti-Semitic and calling it radical. How the fuck is that radical? It's nonviolent resistance. So even with this massive bias against it, specifically in the West, some European countries have criminalized advocating BDS. They said that's an anti-Semitic hate speech. My God. So there's nothing, Palestinians have to lay down and take it. You can't fight back in any way, shape, or form, because if you do, you're anti-Semitic and you hate all Jews. Unbelievably absurd argument. But the numbers are showing that it works. Okay? So don't do armed struggle. I get why you feel like you have to, but I think it's definitely counterproductive because you're going to lose. And it's also immoral because once you start going after civilians, then you become the bad guy. So don't do that, okay? Armed struggle is not the way to go. Negotiations, I wouldn't even do those because Netanyahu is not an honest actor. He doesn't want to do a deal. He might lie sometimes in public and say he does, but he doesn't. His actions prove it. So that only leaves us nonviolent resistance. What you do is you apply pressure, economic pressure, boycott, divestments, and sanctions. You force them to the table to get a deal. And then also, hopefully people in the West understand that we need to apply pressure to our government, because if the U.S. would just say, hey, that $3 billion you get a year, done unless you do a two-state deal. If we just said that to Israel, or if we just lifted our veto with the UN and said, hey, we're not going to be partners in crime here anymore, and we're going to actually try to get a Palestinian state. If we just did those things, we would have a deal, we would have a state. So that's the way to move forward, and I hope that the message gets through, because if you do this, you keep the moral high ground, and you end up getting a deal that's palatable. So let's move forward in a productive way, and let's get it done.